Following your time in the war, when you returned, you then went to the University of Sydney Law School. Who do you remember fondly as lecturers during that time of your studies at university?
Oh.
Does anyone spring to mind? For example, others I've interviewed have spoken warmly of Professor Julius Stone.
Yeah, well, I developed an extraordinary admiration for him in later years, not in my student days. He was a very attractive personality. He had an attractive accent, but he didn't mesmerise me as he did many others. I know. I think perhaps I was not sufficiently intellectually developed to appreciate many of his qualities in that regard. But
it's interesting you say that. When I interviewed Sir Anthony Mason, he said he too didn't come to appreciate Julius Stone until much later. He regarded him in his student days as a bit of an ivory tower academic. He was more interested in people who practice law.
Exactly. That was exactly my point of view too. And I've never discussed him with... because Mason and I were contemporaries. He was a year ahead of me at school. He went to Sydney Grammar. But we've never really discussed Julius Stone, but Julius Stone rather put himself outside the eight ball with many students with his appalling textbook that he wrote, a brilliant textbook as I now recognise it, The Province and Function of Law, on jurisprudence. Well, most of my contemporaries, and Masons also, we were concerned with the nuts and bolts of the law rather than the theoretical jurisprudential philosophy that underlay so much of it. At least I was in any event. And that rather sort of relegated Julius Stone to a brilliant intellectual, but somebody who was hard to relate to personally.
So at law school, who did you relate to personally?
Well, there were 4 or 5 of us who'd been contemporaries in the services, either in the Navy or in the Army. I can't think of any of those who achieved significant prominence. David Godfrey Smith was one. He got a triple degree, arts, law and economics, I remember.
Almost a gentleman's degree, as they used to call it.
Yes. But I don't know that I'd pick out anybody in particular. I enjoyed the lectures of John Evans, but he lectured in commercial law and company law, and I liked the precision of commercial law. Contracts, I'm sorry, not company. Contracts in commercial law. I liked the precision of the old black letter contracts law.
So I take it then, as a student, you were never personally attracted perhaps to practising in, say, criminal law. You had a preference always for equity law and commercial law?
Yes, for contracts law, for the commercial working of the law. But I was not a deeply philosophical law student. I wanted to get out and get into practice, have my own clients and go off to court.
Again, was your father influential in all this? Were you taking your tone very much from what your father had done during his legal career?
I may have been subconsciously, but consciously, no. He was quite open. My father didn't try and influence me into doing law. In fact, when my time at the Navy was drawing to a close, I was offered a permanent commission in the permanent Navy. And they were not... The Navy was very sparing about that because there were an awful lot of, the wartime people coming out wanting to soldier on and doing this or that. And the Navy officers at that stage had nearly all been to the Naval College. So there were not many reserve officers who were offered permanent commissions. And I was very flattered to be offered a commission in the permanent Navy. And I remember talking it over with my father, and he didn't try and influence me into it. He said, look, you've got to do what you want to do. He left it very much to me to make my decision.
Was it a difficult decision for you, nevertheless?
No, it wasn't, because I wanted to get into the law. I wanted to get out and practice law.
So, moving then to your admission day, you remember the exact date? It was 1951, wasn't it?
Well, it would have been February, I know. It would 47, 48, 49. Yes, February 51.
You remember that day well? All your family were there?
I don't remember it awfully well, no.
Were there any newspaper photographers? Sir Anthony Mason showed me a rather nice photograph of he and his wife taken on admission day, which I believe was photographed by a newspaperman who they used to hang around the courts. It was against bar rules in those days to be photographed, but somehow he was photographed, and that photo has now floated down and ended up on the cover of Justinian magazine many years later.
Oh, did it? No, the press were there. Some photographs were taken on the day of my graduation in the Sydney University in February, early February 51. But I don't remember any photographers at the court. I wanted to keep very much a low profile at that stage, so I didn't want to be flaunting myself around, generating ill will amongst the others at the bar. I wanted to be one of the mob.
Who moved your admission?
Norman Jenkin.
Norman Jenkin was an important early mentor for you, wasn't he?
Yes. I say yes because I didn't ever look upon him as a mentor. I was flattered by his friendship, but I made my own way, I'll put it that way. I was always fiercely independent, you know. I made my own way in whatever I was wanting to do.
Was that partly because of your father having been a Supreme Court judge? You felt it necessary to prove yourself?
Yes. I didn't want to float in on my father, on the family reputation or wings. I wanted to establish myself in my own right. That was the product of my 3 or 4 years in the Navy.
And understandably,